Greetings, viewers. Welcome to Righteous Academy. For today, I just want to welcome you all to this tutorial video for biology, where I'll be teaching living organisms and life processes. So, when learning biology, it is always advised to know the definition. Not that one day the definition will come in the exam room, but for us to understand more of what we expect in biology. So, biology, we say, is the study of living organisms. So, biology is the study of living organisms. Others may say biology is the study of life. Others may say biology is the study of life processes that takes place in living organisms. So I encourage you to go by this simplest definition where we say biology is the study of living organisms. So after now knowing the definition of biology, or the definition for biology, we have to understand now what this term means. What is a living organism? So a living organism is an organism that is able to carry out life processes. A living organism is an organism. A living organism is an organism that is able to carry out life processes. Now, what must come to your mind is, what are these life processes? So these life processes are also the things of which we refer to as the characteristics of living organisms. So those characteristics of living organisms are the same thing we refer to as life processes. So for something to be called a living organism, it has to carry out those life processes. So we are just going to move on to the characteristics of living organisms. So the characteristics of living organisms. So on the characteristics of living organisms, number one, we talk about reproduction. And first, before I begin to talk about these characteristics of living organisms, we first have to understand the two groups we have of living organisms. So the two groups we have for living organisms, we have plants and animals. So the two groups we have for living organisms, we have plants and animals. So we have to understand that all the characteristics we are going to mention here, they have to apply to plants and animals. You cannot mention a characteristic that only takes place in a plant, while in an animal does not take place. So here all the characteristics we have to mention, they have to be able to occur in both plants and animals. So first here we have reproduction. Now, what I want you to understand on the term reproduction is, when we say reproduction, it means we are saying it in general. We are not specifying, or we are not being specific. When we say reproduction, it means we are referring to the process responsible for the production of offsprings. Now, what you need to understand that is that plants produce offsprings and animals also produce offsprings. When we say offsprings, we mean to say young living organisms. So reproduction, we are going to define it as the process by which living by which living organisms produce their offsprings. Now, this definition is applying both to plants and animals, because plants are able to produce their offsprings, and animals are also able to produce their offsprings. Now, what you also need to understand here is that the reproduction that takes place in plants is what we refer to as we have sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction. When you say sexual reproduction, that means now you are specifying the kind of reproduction. And when you say asexual reproduction, it also means you are now specifying. So reproduction, it is the term in general that applies both to plants and animals. When we have the two types of reproduction, which we call asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. So we move on to the second characteristic, which is known as respiration. So respiration is also a process that occurs in both plants and animals. So what we need to know on respiration is respiration, this is just the process by which the glucose is broken down to release energy. Now remember, in my definition, I've not mentioned anywhere to say oxygen. When you are mentioning oxygen in the definition for respiration, it means you are referring to as the type of respiration which is known as aerobic respiration. So when we are asked to define respiration, we have to know that we have to define it in general. So respiration, this is the chemical breakdown of glucose to release energy. So respiration, the type of respiration that takes place in plants is what we refer to as anaerobic respiration, while the kind of respiration that takes place in animals is what we refer to as aerobic respiration, because for it to take place, there is need for oxygen. Whereas in the plant, we all know that oxygen is released as a byproduct, and it is not useful in a plant. So respiration takes place in the absence of oxygen in plants. So no wonder the kind of respiration that mainly takes place in the plant is known as anaerobic respiration. Then we are going to move on to the other characteristic, which is known as, we have growth. So what we need to understand on growth is that this is just the permanent increase. Growth is the permanent increase. Growth is the permanent increase in the size and the mass of a living organism. In the size and mass of the living organism. So growth, we are saying it is the permanent increase because it is non-reversible. It cannot be reversed. So growth is also a general term referring to plants and animals. So here we have defined growth in general, saying growth is a permanent increase in the size and mass of a living organism. In the size and mass of a living organism. I hope it is clear to see. Okay. So we also move on to the other characteristic, which is known as movement. Movement. So movement is also one of the characteristics of living organisms. So when we say movement, it also means the same. The term here, it is referring to both animals and the plants. So the movement that takes place in plants, it is what we call tropism, while the movement that takes place in living organisms is what we call locomotion. I know you have heard it before, so I will not spend much of the time on explaining the terms tropism and locomotion. Or let me just do it for the sake of someone. So the meaning for locomotion, this is the movement that takes place, or this is the movement of a living organism, of which we call animals, or this is the movement that takes place in animals, or this is the movement demonstrated by animals. Then tropism, it is a plant response toward change of stimulus. Stimulus is a substance that causes a change, that causes a plant response. So stimulus is a substance that causes a plant response. So movement here, we have to define it in general. So movement is the change in posture. It's a change in posture of a living organism. It's the change in posture of a living organism without a external help. Meaning it can be the movement in plants, it can be the movement in animals. Then, so here we have talked about reproduction, respiration, growth, movement. So we also have to talk about nutrition. So we have nutrition. It can be referred to as nutrition or feeding. Sometimes we say feeding, sometimes we can call it nutrition. So nutrition, this is the ability of a living organism to obtain nutrients. The ability of a living organism to obtain nutrients. Then the kind of nutrition that takes place in plants is known as autotrophic nutrition, while the kind of nutrition that takes place in animals is called heterotrophic nutrition. Then we move on to excretion. So here we have talked about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 excretion. excretion, what we need to understand is it is the removal of metabolic substances out of the body of a living organism. It might be a plant, it might be an animal. So the removal of metabolic substances out of the body of a living organism. Excretion is the process by which metabolic substances are released out of the body of a living organism. Out of the body of a living organism. So the excretion we are talking about here, in plants, we have respiration. So in plants, or let me talk about photosynthesis. So in plants, when the process known as photosynthesis takes place, oxygen is released as a metabolic waste product. When in animals, when respiration takes place, we have carbon dioxide being released as a metabolic waste product. So all these are the characteristics of living organisms. We just have to include now the last one, which is of which we call irritability. The last one of which we call irritability, or sometimes it is referred to as sensitivity. So we have irritability or sensitivity. So this is the last characteristics. So this is the last characteristic that helps us to identify living organisms. So irritability, it is the ability, irritability or sensitivity, it is the ability of a living organism to respond to change in stimulus. Let me just write it in. Is the ability of a living organism to respond to change in stimuli. Stimuli, remember I said stimuli, it can be also be called as stimulus. So a stimulus is a substance or a chemical that causes a plant response, or that causes a change in the environment. So a stimulus is a substance that causes a change in the environment. So all these are the characteristics of living organisms. Now, after knowing all the characteristics of living organisms, we conclude by now knowing and understanding the terms known as metabolism. We have this term which is known as metabolism, or sometimes it may be called metabolic reaction. Metabolic reaction or metabolism, it is one and the same thing. So metabolism, what we need to understand, metabolism is the sum of all chemical reactions. The sum of all chemical reactions that takes place inside the body of the living organisms. So it might be the sum of all these characteristics, as long as they are taking place in the body of the living organisms, then that is what we call metabolism. So metabolism, it is the sum of all chemical reactions. So metabolism, it is the sum of all chemical reaction. Let me write it for you. So metabolism is the sum of all chemical reactions that take place in the body of a living organism. Now, after knowing the definition for metabolism, we have to come to a point where we understand that we have two types of metabolism, because it is not all the chemical reactions that take place that needs energy. Some chemical reactions produce energy, when some chemical reactions use energy. When some chemical reactions use large complex materials to produce smaller molecules, while some other chemical reactions use smaller molecules to produce large complex molecules. So that is what brings us to a point where now we have to understand the two types of metabolisms. So the number one, we have the first characteristic, of which we call anabolic reaction. Anabolic reaction. So anabolic reaction, first of all, we have to understand that it is a build-up reaction. It is a build-up reaction. So it is a build-up reaction, meaning it is going to use smaller molecules to form large complex molecules. So this is a reaction. This is a reaction that synthesizes large complex molecules from smaller molecules. Then second we have catabolic. Catabolic reaction. So these are the two types of metabolism. So second, we have catabolic reaction, which is a breakdown reaction. So this is a breakdown reaction. So catabolic reaction is a reaction that break down large complex is a reaction that breaks down large complex molecules into simpler molecules. So the two types of metabolism is number one, we have anabolic reaction, then second we have a catabolic reaction. So all this is what you need to understand on this topic, which is known as living organisms and life processes. So for now, all you can do is don't forget to subscribe, share the video. We need more people. We need people to start engaging, and I think it is going to be next week where I'm going now to announce my programs. So here now we have started teaching full lesson videos, then followed by answering questions, because we cannot be answering questions whilst without teaching a lesson. So since now I've taught this topic, I'm going now to release videos of me answering questions. So if you want to join me, or if you have found this topic or this lesson or this tutorial video very interesting, share the video, subscribe, don't forget to comment, because your comments are the first thing that builds us, or your comments are the things we need to improve. So if you have any suggestions on how you feel like we need to be presenting, or how you feel like we need to be explaining, you can comment in the comment section. Don't forget to subscribe, share the video. This has been Righteous Academy. Share the video. Your presenter, Mr. Mtafadi.
This is Righteous Academy, where dreams grow wild like a big oak tree. Knowledge blooms like a flower free. Open your mind and let it be. Don't sweat the tough, we break it down.